July 7th, 1944, just over a month after D-Day. A back road near the village of La Haye-du-Puys in northern France. It was late afternoon. The air was thick with smoke and mist, and the sky hung low like a blanket about to fall. Private Thomas Hawkins, a 24-year-old farm boy from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, crouched behind a broken hedge row. His face was caked in mud and sweat, a smear of blood trickling from above his right eyebrow. In front of him stood the battered remains of a 57mm anti-tank gun. The sighting scope had been shattered earlier that morning. There were only 4 armor-piercing shells left. No radio, no backup, no orders. From the distance came a familiar rumble, low and steady, like thunder rolling across concrete. A German Panzer column, multiple tanks, at least 10, maybe more. The steel beasts of the Nazi war machine were closing in, moving faster than intelligence had warned. They were headed straight down that narrow road, the only supply route into the Allied forward position. Hawkins knew the truth. The line wouldn't hold. If those tanks made it through, every man in the nearby infantry battalion would be trapped. They had no anti-tank support, no time to run, and all he had was a damaged cannon and a prayer. He pressed his cheek against the cracked steel, steadying his breathing. He whispered, not to God, not to anyone, but to himself, "If I get one shot, I'll make it count." What happened over the next 9 minutes would become one of the most shocking moments of the Normandy campaign. And yet, almost no one has ever heard of it, until now. The making of an ordinary soldier. Thomas Hawkins was not born to be a soldier. He was born on a patch of farmland outside Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where the horizon was wider than the world he imagined. His father raised dairy cattle. His mother kept the house and 6 children moving like clockwork. Thomas was the youngest, quiet, red-haired, and thin as the wooden fence posts that lined their fields. Most boys in Lancaster played baseball. Thomas preferred the woods. His father had given him a small .22 caliber rifle when he turned 10, and they would hunt squirrels and rabbits before sunrise. His father's rule was simple: never waste a shot. If you were going to pull the trigger, you had to feel the rhythm of the wind, the weight of the air, and the heartbeat in your fingertips. "You don't shoot with your eyes, Tommy," his father would say. "You shoot with your gut." Years later, that single sentence would decide the fate of a German Panzer column. When the war reached across the ocean, Thomas did not rush to enlist. The Hawkins family listened to President Roosevelt's speech on the old Zenith radio the day after Pearl Harbor. His brothers were already married, working the farms. Thomas was still mending tractors and milking cows. He thought the war would be over before they ever called his name. But in March of 1943, the letter came. Selective Service Draft Notice. He left home with 1 duffel bag and a folded photograph of his family's farm dog, Rex. The train took him to Fort Benning, Georgia. Basic training was hell. Georgia heat, red dust, and endless shouting sergeants. But Hawkins was steady. Not the strongest, not the fastest, yet somehow dependable. He could read a field, like he used to read the woods. When he hit a target, he did not celebrate. He just adjusted and fired again. An instructor noticed his calm under pressure and moved him to anti-tank training. The Americans called it the 57mm gun. It was a slim cannon, light enough to drag with a jeep, but deadly when placed right. The British called it the 6-pounder. To Hawkins, it was simply the mule. The weapon kicked hard, loud, and precise. He learned how to strip it, oil it, and reassemble it blindfolded. By winter of 1943, he could judge distance by sound alone, how the whistle of the shell shifted as it cut through the wind. Still, Hawkins never saw himself as a hero. In letters home, he joked that he was just the guy who keeps the mule fed. His mother wrote back every Sunday, "Be brave, Tommy, but don't be reckless." He folded each letter and tucked them in his breast pocket for luck. In May of 1944, his unit boarded a troop ship bound for England. The ocean crossing took nearly 10 days. The bunks smelled of oil and salt. On the third night, he listened to older soldiers whispering about German tanks, the Panzers that had crushed France in 1940. They said the armor was so thick that small caliber shells bounced off like pebbles. The name Panzer itself carried a weight, a growl, almost human in its menace. Hawkins did not speak, but he imagined what it would feel like to face one of those machines with only a gun crew and a handful of shells. By early July, they were pushing deeper into Normandy after the initial invasion. Officers walked the rows of tents in Normandy, reminding everyone of their mission: break Hitler's wall and liberate Europe. Hawkins checked his weapon, packed his rations, and said nothing. He wasn't thinking about liberation or glory. He was thinking about whether he'd still be able to hear the sound of Pennsylvania crickets after the first shot fired. 4 days later, he would advance to the front lines in Normandy, dragging that same 57mm gun through the mud, his heart pounding not from fear, but from duty. He was, as his sergeant once said, an ordinary man about to meet an extraordinary moment. The steel column approaches. The village of La Haye-du-Puy was quiet that morning. Too quiet. It sat between rolling hedgerows and narrow farm lanes, like so many other towns in Normandy. Stone houses, slate roofs, and the smell of wet earth. By July 7th, 1944, the American front line had pushed south from Utah Beach through the hedgerows. The plan was to push south, disrupt German reinforcements, and seize key roads before they could regroup. But intelligence had missed one critical fact. A German Panzer column was moving north, fast. Private Thomas Hawkins and his gun crew had been ordered to hold the eastern approach into town. Their 57mm anti-tank gun was positioned near a tree line overlooking a narrow gravel road. It was an ideal cover, no elevation, limited visibility, but it was all they had. They had arrived the night before, under cover of darkness, and spent most of the morning clearing brush and preparing fallback points. Then, sometime around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the first sound came. It started as a faint hum, then a tremble in the ground, the kind of vibration that reaches your spine before your ears. Hawkins stood still, his hand resting on the cold steel barrel of the gun. His loader, Private Kinney, looked up from the ammo box and whispered, "You feel that?" The sound grew louder. Not just one engine, many. The unmistakable grinding of treads, the churning of gears, the low rumble of something heavy and deliberate. Hawkins stepped out from behind the brush and raised his field glasses. Through the mist and haze, he saw them, black crosses on dark gray hulls. Panzer Mark IV tanks, at least 3 abreast, followed by armored half-tracks and supply trucks. He counted at least 10 vehicles, maybe more. This wasn't just a patrol. It was a full mechanized counterattack. The road they were on was barely wide enough for one vehicle. but it led directly into La Haye du Puys. If they broke through, the village would fall. Infantry companies inside would be overrun. Hawkins lowered his binoculars. There was no time to radio for support. No air cover, no artillery. Just 4 men, a damaged cannon, and a handful of armor-piercing rounds. To make matters worse, their sighting scope had cracked during a shell impact that morning. It was still technically usable, but inaccurate. The team had reported it, but replacements were unavailable. Hawkins turned to the others. "We're not going to stop them all," he said plainly, "but we can slow them down." Private Kinney, sweating through his undershirt, asked, "How many shells we got left?" 4. "That's it." The other crew members exchanged looks. No one spoke. Hawkins took a knee, placed a hand on the cannon's breech, and closed his eyes. He could feel the rhythm of the approaching machines like drum beats from another world. The air tasted metallic, like rust and rain. He wasn't afraid. Not exactly. What he felt was something colder, something clearer, a certainty that no one else was coming, that they were alone, and that every second counted. The lead Panzer came into view. "I'm not waiting for orders." Private Thomas Hawkins had never fired the 57mm anti-tank gun in live combat. Not until now. But he had rehearsed this moment 100 times on muddy fields back in Georgia, pretending the distant tree line was an approaching column of tanks. The difference here was simple. This time, it was real, and he had no room for error. The lead Panzer rolled forward like a steel fist through fog. It was a Mark IV, the workhorse of the German armored divisions. 30 tons of iron, a 75mm high-velocity cannon, and armor thick enough to shrug off small arms fire and light explosives. It was designed to instill fear, and it worked. Private Kinney was already at the ammunition box, gloved hands trembling as he lifted the first armor-piercing shell. Hawkins steadied the cannon, trying to line it up despite the cracked sighting scope. He looked down the barrel and saw only distortion. He adjusted left. Still wrong. There was no way to get a clean aim. "We're blind," he muttered. "What do we do?" Kinney asked. Hawkins didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the terrain. The road ahead narrowed at a small stone bridge about 200 yards down. Beyond the bridge, the road curved around a shallow slope, just wide enough for one tank at a time. He noticed the dampness on the far edge of the bridge. Erosion, water running beneath from recent rain. He wasn't going to shoot the tank. He was going to shoot the road. "Load it," he said. "You sure?" Kinney asked. "Nope, but I'm not waiting for permission." Hawkins dropped into firing position and braced his shoulder. No sight, no markers, just memory and gut. He remembered the hunting trips, the way his father had taught him to feel the moment, not think it. He lined up the barrel just right of the bridge's corner and took a long breath. Exhaled. "Firing!" The cannon kicked back hard, the recoil slamming into the dirt. For a split second, nothing. Then, impact. The shell struck just to the right of the bridge's support wall, cracking the edge. Chunks of stone erupted, and dirt crumbled beneath the weight of the road. Not a full collapse, but enough. The path was now fractured, uneven, and dangerous for anything more than a jeep. The lead Panzer saw the damage too late. Its driver tried to brake, but momentum carried the vehicle forward. The right tread slipped over the loose edge, tilting the tank just enough to knock it off balance. The massive machine ground to a halt, tilted awkwardly, blocking the road completely. Behind it, chaos. The 2nd and 3rd Panzers slammed on their brakes. One skidded sideways into the ditch. The 3rd halted just in time, but the line was broken, and worse for them, they were bunched up, clustered, exposed, and still moving forward without space to maneuver. Hawkins turned to Kinney. "Give me the 2nd shell." This time, he didn't aim for the tank. He aimed for the fuel truck at the rear of the convoy. He fired. The explosion was instant and enormous. Flames shot 20 feet into the air. The truck burst like a matchstick soaked in gasoline. The heat was blinding. Shrapnel tore through nearby vehicles. One of the half-tracks caught fire, igniting its ammunition. Secondary blasts rocked the countryside, sending smoke into the sky. In less than 60 seconds, the Panzer column had turned into a traffic jam of steel and flame. Kinney looked over, eyes wide. "Holy hell, Tommy?" Hawkins didn't smile. He was already reaching for the 3rd shell. He said only this: "We're not done." The art of chaos. Smoke blanketed the field like a curtain. Flames danced along the crushed remains of the fuel truck. The once unstoppable German Panzer column was no longer a line. It was a knot. Tangled, burning, and confused. Private Thomas Hawkins didn't wait. He knew better than to celebrate too early. The 3rd shell clanked into place. Kinney slammed the breech shut and ducked instinctively. "Target?" Kinney asked. "The one trying to turn around," Hawkins replied. One of the Panthers, sleek, heavily armored, and more powerful than the standard Mark IV, had backed up into a clearing, attempting to reverse out of the ambush zone. It was the only tank with enough room to pivot. If it escaped, it could flank the American line, or worse, call in reinforcements. Hawkins adjusted the cannon slightly, judging elevation and distance by memory. He didn't speak. He just pulled the trigger. The 57mm shell whistled through the smoky air and struck the Panther's rear armor. The impact didn't destroy it outright, but it disabled the engine. Black smoke billowed from the back. The tank lurched forward a few feet and died in place. Now the Germans were panicking. Voices in German barked orders from the tanks and half-tracks. Some soldiers dismounted, running for cover. Others fired blindly toward the tree line, searching for an enemy they couldn't see. The Americans? Just 4 of them behind a broken cannon, half a dozen shells, and fading cover. But Hawkins had one thing the Germans didn't. He had control of the rhythm. Every time he fired, he forced them to react. Every delay, every explosion, every flicker of doubt in the enemy's eyes, he owned it. "Shell number 4, Hawkins shouted. Kinney hesitated. "We only got one left after this." "Then let's make this one count." He turned the cannon toward the center of the road, where 2 tanks had become wedged side by side in confusion. One had tried to maneuver around the burning wreck, but had clipped its partner. Their treads had locked up, a perfect target. The cannon fired again. This time, the shell hit low, beneath the turret of the forward Mark IV. Sparks and flame burst from underneath. The tank rocked violently, then stopped moving altogether. It didn't explode, but it was dead, disabled. A 50-ton corpse right in the middle of the kill zone. For the first time since the ambush began, Hawkins heard something new. Silence. No engines revving. No shouted commands. Just the crackle of fire, the pop of cooking ammunition, and the slow, metallic groan of cooling armor. The Panzer column was paralyzed, pinned between a collapsed bridge, burning wrecks, and blocked escape routes. The once feared tide of German armor had become a stationary graveyard, but Hawkins wasn't breathing easy yet. He stood slowly, scanning the horizon. Something was wrong. Too easy, too quiet. Then he saw it. A lone panther, still mobile, was inching forward through the trees on the far left flank. It was moving slow, quietly, using cover, like a hunter. It had seen the muzzle flash of Hawkins' gun, and it was coming for him. One shell left. The surviving panther moved like a predator, slow, quiet, deliberate. Its turret stayed low, rotating as it crept along the tree line, searching for the source of the ambush. Hawkins saw the angle it was taking. Not down the main road, but up along the eastern slope, trying to flank his position from higher ground. "Tommy, it's coming," Kinney whispered. "I see it." Hawkins kept his voice calm, but inside he felt a cold pressure building behind his ribs. They had spent their last 3 shells, creating a wall of fire and steel, but now it had come down to this: a single shell left in the crate. One. No backup, no room for error, no time to relocate. The Panther would have a clear shot in under a minute, and its gun, a 75mm high-velocity cannon, could rip through trees, bunkers, or bone without slowing down. Hawkins crouched next to the ammo box, lifted the last shell, and paused. It felt heavier than the others, not physically, mentally. The weight of everything they had left was inside that one casing. He looked at Kinney, who was frozen in place, hands trembling. "You with me?" Hawkins asked. Kinney nodded, but his lips were tight. "Then load it." The round slid into the chamber. The breech clanged shut. The gun was ready, so was the enemy. The Panther had moved into position. Its barrel now pointed straight at the hedgerow where the Americans were dug in. The crew inside didn't know how many attackers were hiding there. For all they knew, it could be a full squad. But they were going to find out, fast. A branch snapped. Then came the sound Hawkins feared, the distant electric whir of the Panther's turret locking on. He didn't have a clear shot. The tree cover, the smoke, the uneven ground, all of it made aiming nearly impossible. But then he remembered, hunting squirrels with his dad. The times when the sights were useless because the target was too close or too fast. His father's voice came back like a whisper, carried on gunpowder. "You don't aim with your eyes, Tommy. You aim with your gut." He let the memory settle, then dropped to one knee, adjusted the cannon by feel. No sight, no markers, just instinct. He exhaled slowly, felt the dirt beneath his boots, the rumble in the air, the stillness before lightning. "Firing!" The shot left the barrel with a crack, like the sky splitting open. For a half second, silence. Then impact. The shell slammed into the Panther's left tread, blew through the outer skirt armor, and ruptured the engine block. The tank screamed, a mechanical, tortured sound, before the turret collapsed sideways and the vehicle stopped cold. No explosion this time, just death by precision. Kinney dropped to his knees, laughing from shock. "You got it!" "Tommy, you got it!" But Hawkins didn't move. His hands stayed on the cannon. His eyes were locked on the smoking shell of what had nearly killed them. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to believe it was over, that they might live to see the next hour, that 4 shells and a broken scope had turned the tide. And yet, he knew better. Because in war, peace never comes clean. The sacrifice. The battlefield had gone quiet. No more cannon fire. No more treads grinding gravel. Only the distant crackle of burning fuel and the low moans of wounded men, German and American alike. Smoke drifted across the narrow road like fog over a river, curling through the trees. Private Thomas Hawkins stood slowly, his legs shaky beneath him. The back of his neck was soaked in sweat. Dirt caked his uniform. His right hand was blistered from the heat of the cannon, his ears still ringing from the last shot. Kinney crouched nearby, breathless, trying to find the words. "Tommy, you did it," he said, voice cracking. "You really did it. You stopped them." Hawkins didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the burning wrecks ahead. His cannon, their cannon, was empty now. Just a shell of steel and silence. But it had done its job. The moment stretched out. Time felt heavy. Then, out of nowhere, came a shrill metallic whistle, the unmistakable shriek of incoming mortar fire. Before either man could react, a German mortar round landed 10 yards from their position. The blast erupted like thunder. Dirt exploded. Shrapnel sliced the air. Hawkins was thrown backward. His body hit the ground with a sickening thud. Arms splayed beside the cannon. Blood soaked through his left side. A jagged piece of metal had torn through his ribs. Kinney scrambled over, grabbing his shoulders. "Tommy! Tommy, stay with me!" Hawkins blinked slowly. His eyes were glassy but conscious. He looked up at the sky, gray and endless, and tried to speak. His lips moved, but no sound came. A faint gurgle escaped from his throat. Kinney pressed down on the wound, sobbing. "Don't you leave, man. You can't leave now. We're gonna get help. But Hawkins lifted one trembling hand and touched Kinney's arm, just for a second. Then he turned his head ever so slightly toward the cannon, still smoking, still facing forward. His mouth moved again, this time a whisper, barely audible beneath the ringing in the fire. "Tell him. We held." His eyes didn't close. They just stopped moving, still open, still focused, still guarding. Kinney sat there, holding his friend, until the medics arrived 20 minutes later. They found the cannon unmanned, blood-stained, aimed still at the spot where the last Panther had died. And beside it, Private Thomas Hawkins, silent, still, one hand resting on the breech lever, like he never let go. He never ran, never flinched, never backed down, and he never saw the world he saved, after the smoke. By the time reinforcements arrived, the sun had begun to set behind the low Norman hills. The air was thick with soot. The ground trembled not from tanks now, but from the quiet tread of boots, moving cautiously between smoldering wreckage. A scout jeep from the 79th Infantry Division rolled to a stop at the edge of the ambush site. Lieutenant Randall Woods stepped out, scanning the scene with disbelief. 12 vehicles lay destroyed or abandoned. 4 of them were tanks, Panzers, and 1 Panther, blackened, twisted, and silent. A fuel truck had been reduced to a charred skeleton. Ammunition continued to cook off sporadically, popping in the distance like firecrackers. Bodies, both German and American, lay strewn across the field in uneasy silence. Woods turned to his radio operator. "This wasn't air support," he said. "No, sir. No airstrike was called in." Then what did this? The medics found Private Kinney sitting next to a body draped in a blood-soaked tarp. Hawkins. One hand still curled near the cannon. Kinney wouldn't let go of him, wouldn't speak at first. Just stared forward, lips tight, jaw clenched like he was holding something inside that he could never say out loud. Eventually, a chaplain knelt beside him and asked, "Did he die fast?" Kinney answered softly, "He died, standing his ground." Lieutenant Woods ordered a full inspection. His officers measured shell impacts, crater angles, damage trajectories. They found only one American anti-tank position, the 57mm gun, with the shattered scope, covered in dust and blood, barrel still smoking. It made no sense. They calculated the odds. 4 shells used, 4 confirmed hits. All within minutes. All with perfect timing. All without a functioning sight. The official after-action report read, "It is the assessment of this command that Private Thomas Hawkins, acting without orders and using an impaired weapon system, delayed and disabled an enemy armored column estimated at 10 to 12 vehicles, resulting in the preservation of the town of La Haye-du-Puys and prevention of major American casualties." The word began to spread. At first, just among artillery crews, then among tank units, then up through division headquarters. The whispers followed a pattern. "Did you hear about the red-haired farm boy with the busted cannon? The guy who stopped the whole column with one shot? He aimed with no scope, said he aimed with his gut." No one believed it at first, not entirely, but no one could explain it either. In the days that followed the battle, the field near La Haye-du-Puys became hallowed ground. Soldiers from nearby units passed through, pausing to stare at the wreckage, some in silence, others in disbelief. What had looked like an American strongpoint was, in reality, just one cannon and a dead man who had refused to move. Word spread faster than anyone expected. A sergeant from the 101st Airborne called it a one-man Alamo. A British tank crew passing through called it madness, but blessed madness. One Canadian infantryman knelt beside the broken gun, laid a ration biscuit on the breech, and whispered, "For the bloke who didn't blink." But the paperwork was slower. It took 2 weeks for the commendation reports to reach the rear echelon. It took 3 more for them to compile eyewitness accounts, battlefield assessments, and ordnance verification. A Silver Star was approved. Then a Distinguished Service Cross, one of the highest awards the U.S. Army could give for valor under fire. By then Thomas Hawkins was buried. They laid him to rest at the Normandy American Cemetery, just outside Colleville-sur-Mer. Plot D, row 23, grave number 18, White Cross. Inscription simple, PVT, Thomas J. Hawkins, Pennsylvania, July 7, 1944. He was 24 years old. His mother received the telegram first, delivered by hand. Then came the medals. Then came the letter, the one found in his chest pocket, blood-stained but intact. It was dated July 6th, the day before the ambush. He had written, "Dear Ma, by the time you read this, I'm deep in France. They say we'll be pushing forward soon. Everyone's scared but won't admit it. Me too, I guess. I just want to do my part and come home. If I don't, I hope you won't cry too hard. I'm not writing this because I think I'll die. I'm writing it because I've seen good men do brave things, and I figure if the time comes, I want you to know I tried. If I don't come back, tell Dad I remembered the squirrels. He'll understand. Love you always, Tommy." His mother kept the letter in her Bible for the rest of her life. Years later, when a war memorial was built in Lancaster County, she stood at the unveiling with quiet grace. She didn't cry. She just looked at the stone, touched her gloved hand to her son's name, and said, "He was never reckless. He just didn't wait for permission to do what was right." Decades passed. The war ended. Towns rebuilt. Nations moved on. But the story of Thomas Hawkins didn't fade. It lived in boot camp stories, passed from instructors to recruits. It was cited in field manuals, not by name, but as a case study in improvised aim under combat duress. At Fort Sill, Oklahoma, new artillerymen were once shown a diagram of a Normandy ambush, labeled simply Hawkins' Position. He was never famous, never featured in a movie. No statue bears his likeness. Yet among the men who knew what it meant to stare down a Panzer with nothing but guts and steel, his name held weight. And in Normandy, the locals remembered him. The road where the battle occurred was later renamed in quiet tribute, Chemin du Canon Solitaire, the road of the lone gun. There was no ceremony, no ribbon cutting, just a wooden sign nailed to a post where poppies bloom each July. Every year, on the anniversary of the battle, a small group of French schoolchildren come and place flowers at the old hedgerow. Most don't know the full story, but their teachers tell them, "One man stood here, and because he stood, we are free." There's a temptation, when we hear stories like this, to label them as myth, to assume that no real person could stand alone against tanks and fire and terror and win. But the truth is, wars are not won only by generals, air raids, or well-drawn maps. They're often decided in places no one planned for, by people no one expected. People like Private Thomas Hawkins. He wasn't larger than life. He didn't have perfect aim. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He simply understood something that too many forget. That, in the face of overwhelming force, the one thing no enemy can predict is courage. His scope was broken. His team was scattered. His weapon was outdated. But his will? Intact, unshakable. It didn't come from rank or reputation. It came from memory, of his father's voice, of Pennsylvania fields, of a little hunting rifle, and a rule as old as war itself: never waste your shot. Hawkins aimed not with his eyes, but with his life. He didn't just stop a column of tanks. He stopped fear from advancing 1 inch further. And in doing so, he reminded us that the battlefield is not always a place. Sometimes it's a moment, one breath, one choice, one shot. He made his, and it counted. Now we want to hear from you. What part of Thomas Hawkins' story stayed with you the most? His final shot? His letter home? Or simply the fact that no one expected him to change history, and yet he did? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe more people should know stories like this, stories that history books too often leave behind, share this video. Because sometimes the smallest stand becomes the loudest echo.